Joseph Stalin lived from 1878 to 1953. Stalin was a dictator of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Joseph Stalin aligned with the United States and Britain in World War II, but afterward created a tense relationship with the West known as the Cold War.
General George Patton lived from 1885 to 1945. He led two armies in Europe, the 7th and the 3rd, and played an important role in the Battle of the Bulge by stopping the Germans at Bastogne. After the Battle of the Bulge, he led his army across the Rhine River and liberated 10,000 miles of land in Germany. Patton died in Germany in December 1945 of injuries sustained in an automobile accident.
Franklin D. Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States. In 1933, he created the New Deal to provide relief for Americans during the Great Depression. Roosevelt led the United States to victory against Nazi Germany in World War II. Franklin D. Roosevelt died in office in April of 1945.
Erwin Rommel was the commander of German forces in the North Africa Front during World War II. He was very successful in Africa for over 2 years. Finally, the Allied forces, led by General Montgomery, won a major battle at El Alamein. Rommel was forced to retreat to Tripoli, and his days of commanding forces in Africa were over.
British commander Bernard Montgomery was commander of the 8th Army in North Africa. After his victory in El Alamein, he served under Eisenhower in Europe, and his leadership was essential to success in D-Day.
Germany and Russia initially were allies, but Hitler broke their pact and decided to invade Russia. The Battle of Stalingrad, July 17, 1942 through February 2nd of 1943. On September 3rd, 1942, the German 6th Army reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. The Germans were expecting an easy victory over Stalingrad, but unknown to them, the Russians had been building up their defenses and bringing in more troops for months. In the next few days, the Germans fought their way under fierce resistance into the city. For both sides, Stalingrad became a desperate ordeal of rodent-like scurrying from hole to hole. The Germans gave it the name Rat War because of the way most of the fighting was done. The fighting was of the most bitter sort, with tremendous losses for both sides. It was said that the blasted ruins of houses and factories began to sink as hot winds carried the smell of decaying corpses into every nook and cranny. By late September, the Germans had made their way into the middle of the city, but failed in running the Russians out of the city. In the middle of November, the Russians launched a counteroffensive, and they encircled the city. At this point, the German forces could have fought their way out of the city and escaped, but Hitler ordered his men to hold their position at all cost. Rescue attempts were tried and ultimately failed because winter was setting in. Eventually, the Germans surrendered on February 2nd, 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the bloodiest battles in history, with combined military and civilian casualties of nearly 2 million.
Right after World War II began, Germany invaded and then occupied France in May of 1940, known as the Battle of France. America thought it was time to enter the war December of 1941 as a result of Pearl Harbor. All of the Allied forces had roles for Operation Overlord, which they rehearsed for months before D-Day. Months before D-Day, Allied forces performed a large operation to make the Germans think that the Allied forces were going to strike Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, other than Normandy. The Allies used fake equipment and a phantom army commanded by George Patton. They were supposedly based in England, right across from Pas de Calais. Eisenhower planned the invasion for June 5, 1944, but it was delayed 24 hours due to bad weather. The morning of June 6, Eisenhower gave the Allied forces the green light for Operation Overlord. Eisenhower told the troops, "You are about to embark upon the great crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you." The Allies of World War II launched the largest amphibious invasion in history.
Operation Overlord, or more commonly known as the Invasion of Normandy, on June 6, 1944, was the largest amphibious invasion in history. They launched the invasion to get France back from Germany. The invasion kicked off with overnight parachute landings, massive airstrikes, and naval attacks. In the early hours of the morning, troops arrived on the beaches of Normandy. Troops landed on 5 beaches which were codenamed Sword, Juneau, Gold, Omaha, and Utah. Later in the evening, the remaining troops in the Parachute Division landed. The British and Canadians faced little opposition when they captured the Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches. It was the same for the Americans at Utah Beach, but Omaha Beach was another story. The U.S. forces faced heavy resistance at Omaha and suffered 2,000 casualties. In less than a week, the Allied forces had fully secured the beaches in Normandy, and over 326,000 troops, more than 50,000 vehicles, and around 100,000 tons of equipment had landed in Normandy. The Normandy invasion turned the tide of the war into the Allies' favor. This invasion became known as D-Day.
The Allies were looking for a way to invade Nazi-controlled Europe. They decided to invade Italy by going through North Africa and invading Sicily. The Nazis, led by Commander Rommel, fortified a 40-mile line of defense stretching from the Mediterranean to the Qattara Depression. The Nazis' forces totaled 13 divisions, 500 tanks, and 100,000 men. The Allied forces, commanded by Montgomery, had about twice as many men, who were mainly British, Australian, Indian, and South African. On October 23, 1942, the Allied forces attacked the Nazis' defense positions. After 10 days of vicious fighting, the Nazis retreated to Tunisia, and the Allies had won. The Battle of El Alamein was essential to the Allies' victory in Africa. By May 1943, they had complete control over the Mediterranean. The success of the battle ultimately led to the Allies' invasion of Sicily and Italy.
In the winter of 1944, Hitler tried his last offensive on the Western Front. This was Germany's last attempt to drive the Allies out of France. He attempted to split the Allied forces in half with a surprise blitzkrieg attack through the Ardennes to Antwerp. Caught off guard, the Americans fought desperately to halt the German offensive. As the Germans got closer to their goal, the Allies' lines looked like a bulge, which is where the name of the battle came from. Thanks to the brilliant leadership by General George Patton, the Germans were stopped. 3 German armies were involved in the conflict. That is more than 250,000 troops. This battle is seen as one of the most deadly battles of the war. This is mainly part of the surprise of the German attack and the inexperience of the American army that was doing the fighting. This was the costliest battle on the American side, with over 100,000 casualties. The Germans' failure was due to a crucial German shortage of fuel and the enthusiasm of American troops.
World War II ended with the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers. On May 8, 1945, the Allies accepted Germany's surrender, which happened about a week after Hitler committed suicide. Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day, celebrates the end of World War II.